Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
After a suspicious incident, the husband installed wiretap items. But for what exactly? That's what we find out in today's story. Enjoy the story! My name is Bert Watson. I was born in a mid-sized city in the Midwest and grew up as an only child in a typical American family. This is my story. In high school, I was an athlete and played on the handball team. It's not the most popular sport in most parts of the country, but it was common in our town. We had a fanatical coach from Eastern Europe who introduced the sport to our school. I was a good athlete, tall and slim, but I was attracted to handball mainly because of the pretty girls. Did I mention that the women's team trained on the court next to where we practiced? Did I mention these girls were beautiful? Our coach was smart enough to make us train next to them every day. This certainly attracted many of the school's best athletes to join our team, a real honey trap. With this motivation, I eventually became the team's top scorer. There was a girl in our class named Melinda Brolin who played on the girls' team. She was beautiful, tall, blonde, with stunning gray eyes. Melinda and I became friends during our senior year of high school. Melinda was excellent at math, and I was good with computers, so we had a lot in common. Beyond handball, she thought I was cute and funny, and we became a couple. We were lovers all summer, but after a few weeks, Melinda told me that since we would be attending colleges in different states, it would be better for us to break up rather than try to maintain a long-distance relationship. I was upset at the time, and we broke up. I felt lonely during the last month of summer after breaking up with Melinda. My neighbor Tim Vasca hired me to help him build a pool in his backyard. He offered me some money and free use of the pool once it was completed. I needed money to fix my old car, so this was perfect. Tim took a couple of weeks off, and I helped him build the pool. His wife Susan always brought us something to drink while we worked and cooked us lunch. I always asked for skim milk instead of soda or beer. The first time I asked for it, she looked at me a little strangely but brought the milk. We completed the pool in less than 2 weeks, and Tim paid me more than promised. After that, he returned to work. I spent a lot of time by his pool for the rest of the summer. Tim and Susan had 2 younger sons, ages 6 and 8. I liked these boys and played with them a lot by the pool. Susan loved that I entertained her sons. In August, I was using the pool almost every day and began to notice that Susan was often looking at me with interest. I must admit that I also looked at her with interest because she was a beautiful 29-year-old woman with large breasts and long legs. I especially loved it when she wore a bikini and spent time by the pool with us. She was from Eastern Europe and had a killer accent that always turned me on. One day, I was by the pool, getting ready to leave. The boys were in their rooms playing video games. I mentioned to Susan that I needed to buy things for my college dorm. She said she knew about all the sales and would help me with my shopping. She told me to go with her the next day when her sons were busy with sports so that we could spend the whole day together. You know, Bert, in my home country, there is an expression. It translates to different gyms train the body better. My hormones were raging, and I had a hard time saying, what does that mean? It means, Bert, she said, drawing back slowly to look into my eyes with a look as if I were a piece of meat and she a hungry dog, that another lover would be the most exciting thing for me. I froze in place. See you tomorrow, Bert, she said with a twinkle in her eye. I returned home in a state of lust. I told my dad I wanted to go college shopping with Susan. My father caught on quickly and learned the whole story from me with a few hints. He told me to think that if I had an affair with Susan, she might lose her husband. He asked me if Tim divorced Susan, would I leave college and marry Susan and raise her children? I told him I didn't love her and didn't want to marry her. He told me to consider that although Tim was a good man, he was also a strong man and would not tolerate me sleeping with his wife. He warned me that Tim, being a man, would probably beat me up if he found out that I slept with his wife. He told me that although he and Mom would visit me in the hospital if I survived, they wouldn't be too sorry about what happened to me if Tim got to me. This gave me something else to think about. He also told me that if Tim beat me, he would go to jail. If this happened, would I stay in college and help Susan and her children? By the end of our conversation, I felt embarrassed. My father convinced me, and I canceled the adventure with Susan. I don't think I had ever considered adultery before talking to my father, but he gave me a lot to think about. I realized that adultery is not something to be condoned or practiced. Everyone loses. Needless to say, I didn't go to Tim and Susan's pool again after that, and I didn't talk to Susan for a long time. I went to college and lived a normal student life. I dated a few girls and even slept with a few, but I didn't find the one. I wasn't too wild, but sometimes I went out and drank my share of beer. Interestingly, except at parties, milk remained my favorite drink. After graduating from college, I returned home and got a job at a medium-sized company working in the IT department. Shortly before starting work, I accidentally met Melinda. She told me that she had been hired to teach math at a local high school. She was lonely, and I was lonely, so we started dating. We soon fell in love. A few months after we resumed our relationship, she became pregnant. I invited her to become my wife, and she accepted my offer. We got married soon after and lived a happy married life. Our son was born 4 months after our wedding, and our daughter was born 2 years later. Melinda stayed home with our children, planning to do so until they both went to school. Our nightlife was probably similar to most young married couples with small children, 3 or 4 times a week. My mother's parents died and left me some money, which I used as a down payment on a nice house in the country. This windfall, plus my fairly good salary, allowed us to live comfortably on my one job. However, we didn't do too many extravagant things. Our typical vacations and holidays were spent with my family or Melinda's family. My father's parents lived in an old house by a lake about 50 miles away, and we visited them often. They had a big, empty house, and they loved it when we came. We fished, played in the water, and just had a great time as a family. My grandfather was a hunter, and I often went hunting with him. We would bring home game, and my grandmother and wife would cook it. My father was more of a fisherman, so hunting was something my grandfather and I did together, just the two of us. My dad used to take my son fishing, so maybe this will become a special tradition for them. My grandfather loved to hunt birds with a shotgun. One day, while hunting, he told me how he once scared the life out of a man who tried to molest my grandmother by replacing the buckshot in the cartridge with fine salt. Obviously, once it hits a person, it causes pain for several days, plus it scares the person on the other end of the barrel. He died when the children were still small, and my grandmother moved to our city. We kept the old house, and my father kept the weapons and ammunition. My wife was adamantly against having them in our house because of the kids, and sometimes all the logic in the world cannot convince a woman, so there is no point in arguing. When I wanted to go hunting on my grandparents' property, I would just go to my parents and pick up a gun. In the summer, we often went to my parents' or Melinda's parents for the day. Often, when we did this, we would visit Tim and Susan at the pool. They liked our children as I once liked theirs. Many years had passed since Susan's indecent proposal, and there had been no tension between us. In fact, she seemed to be a model wife and mother. I wrote off her behavior towards me as a one-time incident. Susan became a real aunt to our children. I worked for my employer for just over 8 years and became a project manager. When my boss received permission from the CEO and owners to build a central IT system, it was a great opportunity for our company and, in particular, for my career. It took many months of long hours of work. I worked late almost every evening for most of the year, but luckily, we only worked 1 or 2 weekends a month. It put a strain on my relationship with my wife and children, but I did it for the sake of my family. 6 or 7 months into the project, I was sent to another city for 2 weeks to work with another department. There, I worked closely with another department head, Ann Doherty. She was a stunning 30-year-old brunette with a great head on her shoulders and magnificent breasts. She was married and had a son and daughter, like me. I knew her from the first days of working for the company when she worked in the same office. We always got along well, and it was nice to see her again. We worked together for most of those 2 weeks, and there was obvious chemistry between us. Ann had dinner and drinks with me several times, reminiscing about old acquaintances and simply supporting each other. She explained that her husband had gone to stay with his parents for a week with the children while she was busy with the project. I couldn't help but notice that and was becoming more and more flirtatious with me as the weeks passed. I also noticed that she wore cute perfume and had a habit of unbuttoning her blouse and pressing her breasts against me whenever she had the chance. I had been out of the game for a long time, but I knew the signals, and she wanted me, there was no doubt. I was tempted, especially since my intimate needs had been suffering for the last few months and my wife was several states away. Ann and I were the last ones working on the Friday before I left on Saturday. She insisted that we go to dinner together on our last night. When I met her at the hotel bar, my jaw dropped. She was dressed to the nines in a low-cut little black dress that showcased her curves. Her high heels accentuated her legs, and her knee-length slit skirt revealed her entire left leg as she walked. I ordered her a drink and asked where she wanted to go for dinner. She said in a quiet, seductive voice, "How about we go to your room and order dinner there?" I muttered something unintelligible, and she continued, "Don't be shy, Bert. We've been working towards this for 2 weeks, and you know it. Damn, today in the office, when we were together, I was so horny that you must have felt it. Tonight, my husband is away, your wife is a million miles away, and it's just you and me, just this one time." I looked at her in amazement. Never in my life had I experienced such temptation. Honestly, I had probably never been this excited before. It was as if I was enveloped in a cloud of pheromones, and I felt dizzy. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this might happen that night, but nothing prepared me for the reality of seduction. I looked at her eyes, lips, and chest, and then she kissed me, a heartbreaking kiss. I responded to her, and God help me, but I wanted her more than I had ever wanted a woman in my life. Her arms wrapped around my shoulders, my hands were on her hips, and we were alone in the sea of emptiness. I drove home from the airport on autopilot. I passed the test before my will was broken. The kiss was broken, and I pulled away. Deep within, I found the strength to resist and reject what every cell in my body desperately wanted. I was amazed at how close I came to the abyss, but felt proud that I did not fall into it. I felt as if I had awakened from a coma, and it gave me a night arousal that I had never experienced before. And didn't take it very well, calling me a pathetic coward or something similar, but I just smiled, nodded, wished her good night, and went back to my room. When I returned home to my family, I couldn't hug or kiss them. I think I surprised everyone with my reaction, but I was truly happier than ever. On Saturday and Sunday nights, I had long intimacy with Mel while the kids slept. She was happy with me, and we renewed our vows of love for each other. That weekend, I decided to pay more attention to my wife and children, even if I had to work crazy hours. On Monday, I returned to work, reported to my boss about my 2 weeks away, sorted out my mail, and went home at a reasonable hour for the first time in months. Mel was again surprised by my early return. I joined her at our son's handball game, saw him for the first time this season, chatted with other parents, and had some quality family time. After that, we went for pizza. That night, I made love to my wife for the third time that weekend, for the first time in a year. "Wow," she said, wiping the sweat from her brow after our second round of love. "If I hadn't missed you so much when you were away, I would have suggested that you go away for 2 weeks more often. I just realized how important you are to me," I said, "and I wanted to show you how much I love you, and I apologize if I haven't shown it enough in recent months. Honey, I know you do this for us, but it's nice when you show it like this. Now let me show you how much I love you," she said. A few days later, Ann called. She was flirtatious and elusive, but I sensed she wanted to know if I had changed my mind about her proposal. I told her politely but firmly that I did not regret my decision to refuse and that I would not cheat on my wife. She apologized for her persistent behavior. I told her not to worry about it and assured her that I would remain silent. She expressed gratitude for this and then sounded embarrassed by the whole thing. I told her that she would have seduced me if I were a bachelor. It was a compliment to her that it was so difficult for me to refuse her advances. She cried a little and said that her husband was neglecting her and that she had strong suspicions that he might be having an affair. She said she had never cheated on her husband before, but she liked me, was attracted to me, and thought I was the perfect person to give her some attention, affection, and affirmation of her attractiveness. I told her I understood and that I didn't want to interfere in her relationship, but I wished her well. A few months later, I was sent back to Ann's office for a week of meetings. Again, I worked long days and evenings within her team. During the testing period, and was very civil to me, but I noticed that she had a very close relationship with a young colleague named Jeff. One evening at the office, I went to the bathroom in a nearly empty building, and when I came back, I found Jeff stroking Anne's fifth place and whispering in her ear. Anne noticed me at the door and sort of pushed Jeff away. She had enough tact to be a little embarrassed, and I had enough tact not to talk about it. I was relieved that Anne was not my wife. A couple of months later, our big project was successfully completed, and I was expected to receive a promotion and a raise in salary. This made me happy, but I was even more thrilled about returning to a more normal work schedule. My boss sent me and several members of my team to a week-long workshop in Jacksonville, Florida. Never before or since have I seen so many attractive women with such large breasts per capita as in Northeast Florida. It was surprising, really. I met a lot of people from different companies. One evening, I was in a hotel bar where a seminar was taking place. I was the youngest at the table, only 29 years old. When I mentioned this, one of the guys at the table asked if the first wave of divorces was starting among my friends. I asked what he meant. He explained that nowadays, everyone gets married in their early or mid-20s, and divorces start in their late 20s and early 30s. The rest of the table nodded and laughed. One of the men at the table, an older man in his 50s, said that he had been married twice and that he was successful in his second divorce. I asked what he meant. He said he got burned in the first divorce, so he prepared for the second one just in case. He explained that he secretly hid some money from his second wife very carefully to avoid detection in the event of a divorce. I questioned his honesty, and he explained that his second wife wasn't honest either. When he caught her cheating on him with a pool player, he was prepared. His thought was that if the marriage was successful, he would have a secret reserve for emergencies and extra money for his grandchildren. But since his wife turned out to be unfaithful, he ended up with a secret fund for a fresh start after the divorce. He managed to hide over $100,000, which his wife never discovered. He started a new life after his second divorce, and it worked out well for him. Everyone at the table seemed to have their own story about divorce nightmares or new friends who had been through a similar experience. This was a revelation for me. Although I loved and trusted my wife, I began to think that the secret fund idea was a pretty smart move. If nothing else, this could be a great secret education fund for the kids or a nice surprise for the wife when she retires in 30 or 35 years. From that day on, I began saving in a secret fund, withdrawing small amounts each week and requesting that all bonuses be paid separately into separate retirement accounts. In total, this was about 5% of my gross income, enough to make a difference but not too noticeable. Life went on. The kids grew up, Mel and I thrived, and I was happy. 3 years later, I met Anne again at a company event. She told me that Jeff, the same colleague, had been her lover several years ago but had moved to California, and she hadn't had a lover since then. Her marriage improved, and she and her husband Jim repaired their relationship for the sake of their children. We were alone at the table, and the loud music allowed us to talk with some privacy. I joked a little and asked her how it all happened. Her honesty surprised me. "How did you reconcile with your husband?" I asked. "It's interesting because I caught him cheating," she said. Jim has a construction company, and one of his employees was his mistress. I confronted him about it and told him to stop. Of course, I didn't tell him that I had cheated on him. "So you were the engine of reconciliation, huh?" "Yeah, I guess so." After I confronted him, he broke things off with her and asked me for forgiveness. I said I'd try, but we needed to go to a marriage counselor. That was my best idea. "But you were never honest with him." "True, but he was a worse cheater than I was." We worked with a counselor for several months in family and individual sessions. We solved our core problems, which were more serious than the cheating itself. So no, I didn't fully confess, but I didn't hurt him too much for his cheating. I just wanted to fix us. At that moment, I think it's easier for sinners to forgive each other. I noticed she looked at me thoughtfully and then said, "Exactly." The counselor was smart and figured out that I had also cheated. We talked about it in my individual sessions, but he kept my secret from Jim. He agreed that my cheating was related to self-esteem and acceptance, perhaps even revenge, but my infidelity was not the problem in our relationship. The lack of care and attention for each other was the problem, besides communication and prioritizing time together. He also recommended an interesting intimate practice that helped save our marriage. Really? That interesting? I prodded. You see, this is kind of awkward to discuss, but I trust you. Part of rebuilding our intimacy and emotional connection involved a very primal physical connection. What could be more primal than night between a man and a woman? I asked, blushing a little. Well, the marriage counselor recommended Anner night to us, and we are now an Anner couple. Anner? What's that? It's an acronym. It stands for Adult Nurturing and Emotional Relationship. This is an intimate connection between a man and a woman in addition to our normal night life, which, by the way, has never been better. It also includes regular sessions of nurturing and emotional connection. It really brought us into a closer bond than we ever had before. I stared at her somewhat stunned. Some colleagues came to our table, and we stopped talking. As weird as Anner may sound, I was glad Ann and Jim made up. I wasn't sure I could be in their shoes, but to each their own. If they were happier now, then I was happy for them. It wasn't until our daughter Emily was 10 years old and my son Ron was 12 that Melinda finally returned to teaching middle school math. She took a couple of advanced courses that summer but was able to get back to work right away. She was truly gifted when it came to math. In this sense, our children followed her. In fact, they were both excellent students. Like Melinda and me, they were tall and good athletes. They also became team handball players. I was very proud of my children. Melinda gave herself completely to her work. As the children grew older and needed her less, she began to look for another outlet. In addition to teaching middle school math, she volunteered to coach the school's math team. She met with several experienced students and taught them twice a week with an additional 2 hours of studying after school. She received a small stipend for her work, but it wasn't about the money. She prepared them for student Olympiads in mathematics. Under her leadership, the team performed very well. They finished third in the state their first year. The following year, they finished second and qualified for nationals. She traveled with the students to Pennsylvania for a competition. One of her students, a shy lanky kid named Rob, placed in the top 10 math students in a national competition and eventually received a full academic scholarship to Tech. Melinda was especially proud of him because he was talented, but she had never really given math her all until she picked him for the math team. In the 2 years he was on the team, she devoted more time and effort to him. Their hard work and dedication paid off. I was proud of Melinda's accomplishments. Life was good. By this time, I was 37 years old. I was successful and happy at work and with my family. I still went hunting from time to time, and we still visited my grandparents' property to fish and play in the water. We also visited our parents often and spent time at Tim and Susan's pool. Life was good. Of course, my intimate life with Mel had slowed down a bit. We were no longer in our 20s, but we still had a pretty good, if somewhat familiar, personal life. I still loved her with all my heart, and we still had fun together when we had time. Her return to work cut into our time together. She was often busy with the math team or grading homework quizzes and tests. But I couldn't envy her teaching career, it clearly brought her great satisfaction. In any case, my responsibilities at work also increased, and I began to spend many of my own hours working. However, I had more time alone than before when the children were busy with their own affairs and Mel was busy with her work. I have always liked fiction and discovered online sites with stories. I like science fiction and adventure stories, but I also came across several sites with erotic stories. I became hooked on stories about cheating wives, not fantasies about jerks and cuckolds, but dramatic stories about cheating wives. To be honest, it became a minor obsession for me. Every day I scoured new content, searching for stories of love, loss, and betrayal. I took pleasure in getting revenge on cheating partners and cheered on husbands when they rose from the ashes, moved on, and lived their best lives. Although my marriage was strong, I had seen enough of my friends go through the meat grinder of divorce that I could sympathize with their plight. I must admit that reading these stories hooked me. I guess if you read too much of this stuff, you'll get some crazy ideas in your head. In any case, this happened to me. Although I trusted my wife, I had minor suspicions. Telling myself I was doing it as a joke, I even secretly tested my children's DNA. They were mine, it's okay. And yet my suspicions did not completely subside. I read more and started thinking about bugs and webcams for secret surveillance. I bought these tools from my secret accounts and connected the electrical gadgets to a dedicated personal server in my office. Schools were closed for the summer, and Ron and Emily left for summer camp. At the same time, Melinda was at home most of the day. I placed bugs and webcams around the house and activated the recordings. I checked the activity for a few days without finding anything out of the ordinary and started to feel like crap. Why did I do this? Why did I invade my wife's privacy because of paranoia from reading a bunch of stupid stories? I stopped my madness and forgot about the surveillance equipment. Around this time, a rather large project landed on my desk. I was very busy for a couple of weeks. After we finally completed the project, I returned to my office, shuffling papers and fiddling with my electronic files. I remembered my surveillance project and intended to abandon the whole crazy operation, but I decided to look through a few files just in case. When I did, I almost fell out of my chair in surprise. It was literally the first tape I watched. My loving wife had a lover, a recent high school graduate, a star on the math team, and a future tech student. It was a whole seduction routine where my wife was his night teacher. It's not lost on me that this is very similar to the Susan episode of my youth, except this man actually had intim with my wife. I watched a couple more videos, and indeed, they had a night several times at my house while my children were at camp. I didn't listen to everything, but it was clear that my wife was very interested in little Robbie, and not just in his brain. It turned out that my wife had taken her tutoring to the next level. She intended to end things with him after their 2-week affair, but that was not a mistake. I was furious. My first idea was to kill them, but I allowed myself to calm down a little and realized that I didn't want to go to jail. Besides, I was not a murderer and could not do this to my children. My next idea was to find a way to frame my wife and send her to prison for several years. Obviously, I had to think carefully about the whole situation. I instructed my secretary to put all my calls on hold, cancel all appointments for the day, and not allow anyone to disturb me. I closed the door and carefully studied the voice files. If the affair had started while Robbie was still in high school, my wife could have been fired and maybe even arrested. But it turned out that their brief romance began only in that 2-week period after its end, so maybe there won't be any criminal charges or guaranteed dismissal. But I could be a vindictive idiot and expose my wife to our community as a cheating teacher. Best case scenario, public humiliation for her, and she'll probably lose her job and her teaching license. But I didn't want to humiliate my children. They didn't deserve to be collateral damage in all of this. The same went for her parents. They always treated me well. I listened carefully to the last few recordings and realized that they were planning their last meeting. "I'll see you tomorrow," I heard. Damn thoughts of reprisals flooded my mind again. I had a hard time forcing myself to calm down. Although I didn't want to share the video of my wife cheating, I assumed she didn't know I had it. This way, I could blackmail my future ex-wife and get better divorce terms. This would give me some satisfaction and justice, but Robbie also needed to be taught a lesson. I remembered my grandfather's decision in a similar situation many years ago. I took the day off and called the best divorce lawyer I could find. I made an appointment for the next day and took 2 more days off. I went to my parents and told them what I had found out. Sometime later, my father found me in the basement with my grandfather's old shotguns. He was alarmed, but I explained my intentions to him. He eventually helped me replace the lead shot with fine salt and some cartridges. I also took one of my grandfather's old pistols with me. I called my cheating wife and told her that I had to leave town for work and would be back in 2 days. She seemed pleased with my plans. That night, I considered my options in a calmer state. Could I reconcile with my wife? Should I try? It seemed like a one-time short affair. She didn't love this guy, but they were clearly close. However, this was not just an accidental fall, it was planned in advance. It was a sign of her disrespect for me and our marriage. I couldn't live with it. I couldn't stay married to this woman, the woman I'd loved for so long. She ruined everything. Perhaps I was not as good a person as Anne. I just couldn't forgive and forget. Never. I needed to move on, and I needed to get revenge. Since killing an unfaithful wife and her lover was not considered socially acceptable, I had to find my moral satisfaction in some other way. These thoughts swirled around in my head until I finally fell asleep. My children were old enough to come to me, and we could see each other often. The next day, I went to see the lawyer, and we discussed my options. Since we did not have a prenuptial agreement, all joint assets would be divided equally. Since my inheritance money was used for the down payment on the house, I was likely entitled to a larger share of the sale. The lawyer said that the children are old enough for their wishes to be considered in physical custody decisions, but since their mother has been the primary caregiver for most of their lives, she will likely receive primary physical custody. He mentioned that there is also a 50-50 chance of physical custody, but only if both parties agree. The lawyer said that the house would remain until the youngest child turned 18, and then it could be sold and divided in half, minus my down payment. Although she had a full-time job, I made significantly more than Melinda and had much more in my retirement accounts. My lawyer said I might have to pay her alimony for a while, as well as child support. I told him I wanted a divorce and that I would force her to agree to my terms. He said that all documents would be ready in a week. I thought my children would be home before then. I went to the banks and organized our accounts for the divorce process. I checked the time and realized it was time to return early. I parked my car at the end of the street from our house, took my gun bag, and went home. I entered the house quietly through the back door. Everything was clean. I sneaked upstairs to the master bedroom. I burst into the bedroom and shot the cheaters, who were having an intimate. I fired both assault charges at them. They literally flew off the bed, howling in pain and fear. I admired my work for a moment. When the two traitors realized they were not seriously wounded, I threw the empty shotgun on the floor and cleared my throat. They froze, looking at me with grimaces of pain on their faces. I looked at them with contempt. I slowly, deliberately took the gun out of my jacket pocket, then let the anger spill over my face. "I'll kill you," I screamed. The young lover and my cheating wife screamed in fear. My wife and Rob pissed themselves out of fear of death. I aimed the gun at young Robbie. My unfaithful wife make a sound in a voice full of pain, "Don't kill him." Ignoring her, I deliberately walked towards him. He closed his eyes and cowered. My rage was not feigned. It was satisfying seeing him rolling around on the floor in agony, with tears on his face, covered in urine, and his fifth place full of small salt buckshot. My sense of revenge was satisfied. I regained my composure. I had given up on this marriage, but I wanted to leave a small reminder to the two cheaters. I waited until they recovered a little. Melinda lay on the floor, clutching the sheet to her chest, with an expression of fear and confusion on her face. She was silent. Once Robbie was back to breathing evenly, I put the gun to his head again and said, "You little man. You'll learn to stay away from my wife." Rob made a sound of pain and begged for his life. "Don't kill me." "Why not? Or are you dropping out of tech if I let you live? Are you willing to drop out of college and take care of my wife when I divorce that expletive?" The sounds of young boy in love wanted to play the knight in shining armor. "Yes, I'll give it up. I will support her." I shook my head with pity. "Then you are completely stupid. You are a stupid boy if you give up your academic future for a expletive almost 20 years older than you." I paused. "I'm not going to kill you, expletive. I'm not going to kill you, or you. She's a corrupt expletive, and you're a stupid child. Neither of you are worth this." I sighed. The air was full of relief because they knew I wouldn't kill them, but they were wallowing in their own urine, in pain and hopefully shame. I turned to Rob and told him in a cold voice, "But if I see you next to my wife again, I will kill you. Do you understand me?" "Yes," he said. I thought about the fact that I didn't want to pay my nasty wife alimony or excessive child support, so I decided another directive was needed. "One last thing, lover boy. I don't want you to say a word to anyone about your dirty little affair with my wife. If I find out that you told even one person about what you did to her or about this morning, I'll put a damn bullet in your face. You understand?" "I understand. I haven't told anyone anything about this and I never will." I promise. I looked at him long and intently. Finally, I put the gun in my pocket and said, I believe you, Robbie. It's the only reason you're still alive. That, and it's obvious to me that you're just a weak, stupid child. I regret this favor. He shook his head desperately. Your 5th place will hurt like hell for a few days, but it won't do any real harm. I pricked you with salt. When you get home, take a shower and wash yourself thoroughly. Maybe wear a bandage. Don't do this. I need to go to the doctor or something. The scabs should go away in a week or 2. If anyone asks, you fell off your bike, okay? Okay, he said, getting dressed and leaving the house. I closed the door behind him and returned to the bedroom, where my wife was still cowering with tears running down her face. Go take a shower, I said. She went to the bathroom, sounds of crying. I went to the kitchen and poured a full glass of cold milk. I always preferred milk, it had a calming effect on me. I smiled lightly and drank. When my scum wife finished her shower, I heard her crying in the bedroom. She started when I spoke to her. Get dressed and wait for me here. I'll be back in an hour. We need to talk about something. Bert, Shut up, Mal. We can talk when I get back. Just wait for me here. I threw the bag with the shotgun and pistol into the car and drove them back to my parents' house. My father met me there. He looked at me with a question in his eyes. Yes, everything went as we planned. She was there with him, scurrying away like a couple of rabbits. Just drop the weapon, Dad. I don't think any of them will scream, but it would be better if the weapons disappeared. He nodded, and I returned home. There were no police, which was a good sign. My wife was in the bedroom, cleaning urine from the carpet. I looked at her. At 36, she was still a beautiful woman. I sighed, and she turned around with a look of deep sadness on her face. I felt empty. Much of my hatred and anger had dissipated after my previous encounter. If you put a couple of salt shells and a couple of scabs on them, it'll do the trick, I said. Bert, I'm really sorry. Is it true? I won't lie to you. It wasn't our only time, but it will be our last time. Just stop, Mel, I said tiredly. Please, Bert, just let me tell you. I've never done anything like this before. I didn't plan this. Well, at least I wasn't looking for it. I don't love him. It's just, he was so special to me, and we got so close. And look, there's no excuse for this, but... No, there's no excuse, Mel. But there are consequences. Please, Bert, I know what I did was wrong, but I didn't think straight. He was so in love with me, it pleased my ego. I thought I was giving him a gift. He was a virgin, and I. You also decided to be his teacher in the bedroom. I understand, Mel. You wanted a little change, and this kid was your opportunity. No, Bert, this was not the case. It's not that I wanted something that you didn't give me. He wasn't nearly as good in bed as you. For God's sake, he's just a child. Yes, he is. About this, how stupid are you, Mel? Don't you think a kid would talk to his friends about how his hot math teacher? Bert, don't. Had him, and you're cute. Mel, don't you think that even if it never reaches the rumor stage, rumors about it will slip away? Haven't you thought about how things like this could hurt you, your career, your marriage? Rob didn't tell anyone, Mel. The little idiot would have let it slide, maybe not today, maybe not this summer, but at some point when he's back in town over Thanksgiving break, maybe he'll be hanging out with his friends, having had too much beer, and he'll say something, just drop a few details, and that's all it takes, Mel. Well, you were walking around on the side in the first place. Please, Bert, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I don't blame you, but please, you must understand that I love you very much. This is just a situation that has gotten out of control. It was a trip for my ego disguised as good intentions. I promise I've never done this before and I'll never do it again. Well, I'm certainly glad you didn't plan on making your expletive an annual prize for the best student in math. Look, Mel, you haven't asked me yet, but I know what's going on. I'm moving into the guest room for a while. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but I want you to just give me some space and leave me alone until I figure it out. Understood? Yes, Bert, I understand. The children returned home a couple of days later. Melinda and I tried to act normal in front of them. The kids were happy to tell us about their time at camp, but then became so busy with their friends and other things that I don't think they noticed anything unusual between Mel and me. I saw that Mel carried herself with courage, although she was a nervous wreck. To her credit, she left me alone for several days. I took pity on her. Mel, can we talk? I asked one evening when the children had already gone to bed. Yes, of course, Bert, her eyes expressed concern. I decided that we need to get a divorce. Oh no, she make a sound, but quietly so as not to wake the children. I was impressed by her composure. Yes, Mel, I'm going to serve you with divorce papers tomorrow. Well, I'm still going, but I didn't want it to be a complete surprise. I wouldn't say I owe you this after what you did, but I wanted to tell you this face to face. Melinda understood but asked the obligatory question in such cases. Please, Bert, is there no hope for reconciliation? I love you. I screwed up. I don't quite understand why Rob was never a threat to us. Oh my God, please, Bert, please, she begged with tears in her eyes. No, Mel, no. This wasn't a random drunken mistake. I could forgive that. No, what you did was a deliberate decision to become an intimate teacher for a few weeks. I don't know exactly why, and I don't care. You did it on purpose. The woman I married would not have done this, would not have risked our marriage and our family to satisfy some curiosity or pity, or flatter her ego, or anything else. No, you've changed, Mel, and now I've changed. You broke your vows, and now I am free from this marriage. I don't believe in open marriages, Mel. This may work for someone, but it will never work for me. To get freedom from this marriage, I need to divorce you. My decision is final. Then the sobbing began. She was inconsolable, shaking with sobs, choking from her own pain. I felt some pity for her, but I had made up my mind. Almost against my will, I was touched by her pain. She finally regained some of her composure. To her credit, we can say that she did not delay her response. I understand, Bert. You're going to divorce me, and our marriage is over. What will happen now? Tomorrow, you will be given the documents. No matter how angry I am, no matter how angry I was before, I don't hate you that much anymore. I don't want to completely destroy you. We still have our children, and we will be bound by their interests in the future. Yes, we'll still have them, won't we, Bert? She managed to smile, though sadly, and looked into my eyes with hope. I wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she didn't find it. The smile disappeared, and she looked down at her hands again. You should get a lawyer, Mel, and have him look into my divorce suit. But I recommend that you accept the terms of the divorce. They are fair, and I don't want to fight you. I have offered joint legal custody of our children, with you as the primary physical guardian here in this house. I will receive unlimited visitation and physical custody every other week, and I will also pick them up for a month in the summer. You work less than I do and have always been a good mother to them, so it's only fair that they stay here with you. I suggested standard child support based on our incomes, but there will be no alimony. You get half of our liquid assets, and I get half. I'll keep my retirement accounts, and you'll keep yours and your pension. When the kids grow up, we'll sell the house and split the proceeds in half, but I'll get the down payment back with interest. I understand. I will accept these terms of divorce. Will you tell our children why we're getting a divorce? I won't tell them until Emily graduates, if at all, and I won't show them the video of you and Robbie. I promise you this. Do you have a video? Yes, and recordings of conversations too. I have all the evidence to destroy you. An expression of fear flashed across her face. Don't worry, Mel. I was prepared to use them as leverage if necessary, but you were cooperative. Stay cooperative, and I promise they will never see the light of day. Tomorrow, we will tell the children that we are getting a divorce. I'll move in with my parents the next day. She made one last attempt. Bert, it will be difficult to live without you. You were my only love. Please, her voice was weak and soft, like the whisper of a child. I steeled myself. I'm sorry, Mel. After I move, if you need anything related to the house or the kids, you have my number. But what about everything else? My decision is final, so it will be Melinda. Melinda started crying again. It was difficult to tell the children that we were getting a divorce. We didn't say anything about Melinda's affair with Rob, and the kids were confused. They cried, and we promised them that it was not their fault but that there was no chance of reconciliation. The next day, I moved in and started a new chapter of my life. My parents were sad about our divorce, but they were happy to have their grandchildren spend every other weekend with them. Over time, everyone got used to it. I haven't dated much. I worked a lot, saw the children as often as possible, and did not devote much time to women. After a year or so, I started to feel very lonely. I tried online dating and the like, but none of the women I met were attractive to me. It seemed that every woman I was interested in was either bitter towards men or a woman of easy virtue. The latter category made for some fun dates, but I was interested in something serious and long-term. At random, I researched international dating sites. I had always been interested in Buddhism and ended up on a website dedicated to meeting Laotian women. There, I met her. Her name was Leah Bijui. She was beautiful, young, and smart. She was a well-educated university graduate from a Laotian school. Her father was a surgeon, her mother a nurse. She was looking for an American. We started corresponding, and everything went well. She spoke English fluently. Did I mention she was beautiful? She was tall for a Laotian girl, 5 feet 3 inches, with long black hair, dark eyes, and light honey brown skin. Small but with beautiful breasts, almost too big for her small body. I was drawn to her. I told her I was recently divorced and had 2 teenagers. At first, I thought it would be difficult for her, but she only wanted to know the circumstances of my divorce. I told her the truth, and she said she would never cheat on me. After months of texting and video chatting, we planned my trip to LA to meet her. I used my secret money for this trip. I flew into Vientiane via Bangkok, and Leah and my parents met me at the airport and took me to my hotel. Leah lived with her parents. Leah looked better in person than in the video, and she smiled with all her heart when we first met in person. I fell in love with her at first sight. We had lunch or dinner with her family several times during my 3-week stay. We went on excursions with her parents, and I also went out alone with Leah. It was obvious that family was an important part of her life. One day, Leah, her friend, and I were in a restaurant. Her friend was a teacher, like Leah, and she told me, when Leah went to the restroom, that Leah had a fiancé who died at work a week before their wedding. She said Leah was depressed for several months after this and finally came out of it. After a few months, Leah still hadn't met anyone, so her friend suggested she try a dating site. Leah was on it for a few months without any real interest in anyone until she met me. She noticed that I was like medicine for her, that she really came to life when we started texting. Her friend warned me not to break Leah's heart. I knew about Leah's fiancé who died, but I didn't know about her depression and the rest. It touched me. Before leaving, I knew what I had to do. Very simply, I asked her if she wanted to be my wife, and she said yes. I gave her an engagement ring. She knew the Western custom and was glad to have the ring. We kissed, hugged, and swore our love to each other. I left, and we started planning a wedding across the ocean. 6 months later, my children and I went to Vientiane. The wedding was a big event with Buddhist monks present and lasted for several days. After the wedding, I returned home with my new wife. I later found out that my children told Melinda that I married a girl from Laos. Emily and Ron told me that Melinda cried a lot and was very sad for several weeks. My love with Leah was amazing. To my surprise, she had a good understanding of her body and was very responsive. She was an acrobat in bed with enough energy for 3. We just couldn't get enough of each other, and it wasn't just in the bedroom. We loved each other even without night. We always touched each other when we were together, always kissed, held hands, and always hugged. We gave ourselves completely to each other. We both knew what it was like to love and lose and didn't waste time or energy on anything other than expressing our love for each other. The months flew by. By my company's Christmas party, my fiancée was 5 months pregnant and still an amazingly beautiful woman. She wore a party dress that showed off her legs and her ever-expanding breasts but hid her rapidly growing belly. Anna and her husband, Jim, congratulated us at the corporate party. Our first daughter's name was Nancy, after my mother. A year later, we had another beautiful daughter, whom we named Lisa. Leia communicated with her family and friends on Skype. My grandmother died and left me some money. After discussing it with Leia, we decided to move into my old home to have room for our growing family. Melinda accepted my ransom offer. She was only relieved since she and Emily hadn't gotten along since we got divorced. Melinda confessed to her a couple of years ago that the reason for our divorce was that she cheated on me. Emily called her and didn't speak to her for months. Over time, normality returned, but Emily always remained rather cold towards Melinda. Ron, having learned about the circumstances of our divorce, was angry with her but recognized that she was his mother and forgave her more quickly. Anyway, I bought out Melinda's share, and she bought herself a nice apartment. Ron and I helped Melinda move into the apartment, and she thanked me. Emily went to her grandparents instead of helping her mother. I no longer hated Melinda, I was just neutral towards her. My heart was filled with love for Leia and my 4 children. I'd like Emily to completely forgive her mother, but it's not my place to put pressure on her. I told her that her mother loved her and had always been a good mother to her and that it would be better for both of them if she ever forgave her. My love for Leia grew, as did hers for me. Emily moved away for college, and my younger children were growing up quickly. When Lisa was almost 2 years old, Leia told me that she was going to wean her off breastfeeding. This was a disappointment for me because not only did I love her engorged breasts, but we also included nursing in our intim games. What can I say? I've always preferred milk. Years passed. My older children graduated from college and found jobs nearby. My youngest children were growing up quickly. I hadn't followed Melinda too closely, but I knew she dated someone but never took it too far. At some point, it seemed that she began a serious relationship with a man who moved into her apartment. It turned out that this person was an abuser. He threw my ex-wife down the stairs, breaking her leg and arm. The man was arrested, and Melinda was hospitalized. Ron, who was visiting his mother, called me and said Melinda cried all day because her daughter hadn't come to see her. I told Leia what Ron had said. Leia was angry and went to Emily, telling her that she should visit her mother, confront her behavior, and take responsibility. Emily burst into tears. Leia hugged her and reassured her, saying it was time to make peace with Melinda. I took Emily to the hospital. When we arrived at Melinda's room, she cried with joy upon seeing us and thanked me for bringing our daughter. Emily and Melinda cried and forgave each other. I left the room but returned later when Emily went to the toilet. Melinda asked if I could forgive her. I told her that I could and had already forgiven her. She cried a lot again, but this time they were tears of relief and happiness. I told her that I hoped for her future happiness, and I had found mine with Leia and our children. My daughter returned to the room and promised she would visit her again soon. A year later, my daughter was getting married. The wedding was a huge event, and our 2 little daughters were very excited to be flower girls. I took Emily to her fiancé Ron, led his mother and Leia to their seats. Melinda and I were polite to each other, but I tried to avoid her without making it obvious. I had forgiven her, but I would never be able to completely forget her betrayal. She talked a lot with Leia. Leia later told me that Melinda was very friendly to her. At one point, late in the evening, as the party was winding down and long after my younger daughters had been picked up by the sitters, Melinda approached me as I sat at the table with Leia and my old neighbor Susan. Without any decorum, she said in a sad voice, "Bert, I see how much you and Leia love each other. I'm sad that we can never have this again, all because of my stupid mistake. You look so good, so young, so lively and energetic, and I'm just an aging, lonely woman now." Stunned, I replied, "Melinda, I guess I'm living proof that after you've been changed, different gyms really do train the body better." Susan blushed. Melinda just looked embarrassed, and Leah, who I had told the story of Susan trying to seduce me years ago, jumped into my lap, hugged me, and kissed me. "That's true, my love," Leah said. "But don't look for any other Jim other than mine for the rest of your life." What do you think of our story today? I think the husband did a very good job and was not afraid to shoot his wife's lover. Every man would do that if he were him. What's your impression? Write in the comments. Until new videos.